Okay, Patrick, it's time for This Week in Trading History. What do you have in store for us this week?
Well, this week we're going to go to one of the more famous stories on Wall Street, and that's when Soros broke the Bank of England. And what's interesting about this story is that a lot of people, make Soros the centerpiece of it, but it was actually Stanley Druckenmiller that was actually the one that was the key one that discovered and started to put on the trade, right?
That's right. It was actually Stanley's trade. He had the trade on. And what Soros's genius was recognizing the unique opportunity that was offered to him. And what he did was he had the courage to be a pig and just put it on in size. And
Right.
but it's kind of Stanley often just gets he ends up being a footnote, but the reality is that the trading idea actually originated from Stanley, who
Yeah.
I think is the greatest trader that's ever lived. I actually, as much as I'm a fan of Soros, I actually think that Stanley's better. But
One day he'll be on the huddle, right?
that's right. One day he'll be on the huddle, but not after he finds out what you were calling him for many years.
Oh yeah, I misread it early on and called him Stanley and Drunkenmiller before, but
Yeah, that's right.
perfect for the huddle. And
That's right.
So anyway, let's start off by just quickly bringing everyone up to speed. With what the ERM was. First of all, in Europe, there was the exchange rate mechanism that was put in place to introduce European economic unity. And it's a process of working up to the European Union that we know today. And it was to reduce overall the exchange rate variability between these countries and to encourage stability. And it was this idea of a pegged currency system, but it's a semi-peg, which is had some variable within the currency exchange rates within set margins. And really what it comes down to in the most simple form is that Britain just simply entered the ERM at too high of a price, something like 2.7 marks to the pound at the time. And Germany was struggling because in the new unification in 1990s of East and West Germany, they were dealing with all sorts of inflationary pressures, all sorts of different things, and the UK had too large of a deficit, and their currency simply was too expensive. And ultimately, what it came down to is Soros and Stanley realized it was just not tenable for them to stay pegged at this level, and that inevitably the British pound would have to drop. And so what ended up happening was the British government ultimately was forced to withdraw from the ERM mechanism at that price. I think they had like a staggering loss of like $3.4 billion. That was when $3.4 billion was a large number,
That's
right?
Yeah, that's
Like,
right. So Patrick, one second before you go, when was this? Like, most people sit around and they think about Britain and having its own currency, and it's actually kind of amazing to think at one point they were trying to have the euro currency.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so when this actually happened, I was just about to get to this Black Wednesday, this actual event. It was September 16th of 1992. Was when the Black Wednesday occurred, where the speculators broke the pound, and so it was in the months leading up to this Black Wednesday where Stanley and George Soros there were building these huge short positions, betting that the pound will have to fall out of that band. And it's no different than, I think it's like a big victory lap, or not victory lap, but this big thing that every big money manager wants to do is catch some big macro trade like this. Like I'm curious as to whether or not, like for instance today, the Hong Kong will eventually have to have its currency leave a peg, and how many hedge fund managers are trying to make the big bets on that one, right? But this one was actually one that worked, and Soros basically comes in there, and they put on this massive trade, and they made something like $1 billion in one day, or just in a few days, from watching the England having to leave the ERM.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the chart, and for those who want to pull up the chart, you have to do Great Britain like the pound, GBP, and you can't do it against the euro. You got to do it against the Deutschmark. So you have to put it in DEM, and it's been a long time since we've traded Deutschmarks, but you can see that it was trading at 280, and in the space of a week, it kind of fell to 240.
Yeah.
and it was just kind of shocking. And one of the things that people don't realize is that how can a hedge fund take on a central bank? And one of the things that in this day and age, most central banks are trying to get their currencies down. Like, so you get the like, if you think about, nobody wants their currency to actually rise. Most people want their currency down. So when you get a situation like in the old, like it wasn't that long ago that the Bank of Japan used to go and intervene. But the thing is, when a central bank intervenes on the sell side, they technically have unlimited firepower. They can create as much of that currency as they want. But when they're defending a currency, they actually have a limited amount. And so when Soros saw the fact that the bank was spending their bullets defending the currency, he just plugged them, like he filled them in like a butter tart.
I think there was in the Hedge Fund Wizards, the book. There was one of the traders in there talking about it because it was working on a currency desk or something, and it was supposedly the Bank of England announced that they had like $10 billion to defend the pound's exchange rate in the ERM, and Soros kind of conveniently said, "Well, isn't that interesting? Because that's exactly the size of the position I wanted to take."
Sold to you.
So exactly, and well, it was a great story anyway. But it's one of the famed trades of all time, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those classics that immortalized Soros in the history books as one of the all-time greatest traders that's ever lived.
Absolutely. So let's move on.